Welcome to the Basic Bee podcast, a show for the wannabe SEO savvy service providers among us, for the coaches and consultants who dream of becoming known for their storytelling skills, not to mention the solopreneurs who straight up need to master all things social proof to increase sales. After a little reluctantly fully committing to this online world of business, I quickly realized I needed to get people to come to me. I needed to tell them I was here and how I could support them. I dove headfirst into social proof, which led me to SEO, which led me to storytelling. And now it gives me great joy to share what I've learned with other business owners so they skip the hard stuff and ease straight into sales. This podcast gives you expert insights, actionable takeaways, and casual convos with some of the online world's best and brightest experts and strategists. I think that's enough of an intro, so here we go. Welcome back to the Basic Bee podcast. I am so happy that you're here and joining me again. And I've got another incredible business owner and just human for you to meet. We have been connecting and crossing paths in the thread streets, the streets of threads. There we go.
The threats.
The threats. I'm just going to make up new words. So Lindsay Padilla is here with me. We're going to be talking about how to identify a good case study to feature. How do you choose that person? And then some other questions around that. But before we dive into our conversation, here's your quick intro. Lindsay Padilla is an ex-community college professor who accidentally started a business while on the tenure track. Now as the CEO and co-founder of the Hello Audio software, which takes your content and creates private audio feeds to make learning on the go so much easier for your people, Lindsay challenges online industry norms of unfinished courses and unconsumed content with her product. All of her business ideas were born out of her tenure track years teaching adults online at a community college, the ridiculous amount of learning she's done in all things education, and the years spent growing her course creation business online. I also have a couple of notes for myself. I have my podcast producer and friend Leah Bryant to thank for the introduction, both to Lindsay and to Hello Audio. I've used Hello Audio for a few things as a private podcast version of my case study training, a private podcast to help launch the training, and 14 more ideas that I have floating in my head for future private podcasts. So I'm no stranger to Hello Audio. And some of these case studies we're going to be talking about, which I might mention throughout the interview. I've listened to them. I know these people. I can totally attest to using even the private podcast. So Lindsay, hello, my friend.
Hi. Well, that's so fun. We got to have you on our show now.
Right? I know. All the podcasts. Here we go. So I'm going to ask you the one question that I love asking all of my guests, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty stuff about case studies and who to feature. So the question is, which do you feel like is most important for sales? SEO, storytelling, or social proof?
Ooh, that's a good question. I wish I could say SEO, but literally that game is I'm just starting to play it. So that's always just felt dangerous. So, I've run a business without SEO, so we're cool there. I think I will go with you didn't say case studies. What'd you call the last one? Social proof.
Social proof. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll go with social proof because, and it may be just my own biases of how I behave, right? As a buyer, I don't think all buyers are exactly the same, but I think the social proof thing is a really easy place to actually create stories, right? So to me, it's a jumping off point of the storytelling piece as well. So yeah, it's cool that I have stories to tell about how I've built a business or something, but that's not using my product, right? So having people use my product successfully and be able to talk about that, I think is magic for sure.
Oh, I could not agree more. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that we link to your private podcast about private podcasts, which I love. I love how meta it is because my stuff gets really meta, so it's really fun when someone else gets really meta. But how many people have you interviewed for that podcast?
Yeah, so we have two. So we have a private podcast called Success Stories, which was one of our early lead magnets. And it 100% is case studies. It's called the Success Story Podcast. And it was cool because it was, you demonstrating our product. So people who are kind of interested and curious about what it is, but then it's also how people are actually using it in their business. But what's cool about it is I ran it completely async. So it was all over Voxer, and I had 7 or 8 questions, and they could I sent them a link. I think it was a Notion page, and then they would just answer the questions in each individual file. So then I would just group it all together and make sure it sounded good. And then we have these 5-minute case studies. There's 45 on that one. And that kind of, became our most successful lead magnet. And then, we always knew we wanted to launch a public podcast. And so the starting point was obviously bringing some of those success story people on to like actually have a conversation versus them just saying, here's the results, here's why I love it, yada, yada. And then we were able to kind of build and see also, here's where you've gone since that, which I think we ran that first run of it in like 2021. So it's been a couple of years. We've added some case studies on it, but not like a huge push. And so now we're really focused on the public podcast about private podcasting. And that one has, I think we're going to hit 30 some odd episodes. I don't know. I don't know where my recording is mixed with my incoming stuff, but yeah, we've been running it about 9 months now as well. So yeah.
I love hearing that. I didn't actually know that you have case studies on your public podcast, and now I got to go jump over there. And of course I will make sure that's linked, but yeah, do you feel like there's a better scenario doing like the asynchronous calls or doing the live interviews?
Better is a tough word because they're very different. And it's funny because we get asked a lot like, well, should I launch a private podcast or a public one? And we started with private and async because it's way easier. And especially as like 3 co-founders, it's easier on the person you're asking to be a guest. They don't have to show up at a certain time. So they love that. So I loved kind of demoing that asyncness of it, which we're starting to see a lot of in summits and that kind of thing as it relates to like, audio first type content. So love that. And I think that it was definitely a great starting point for us because we wrote some blogs about it and we put it in our newsletter, these case studies. So we've like used it. And then of course, right, when you get meta on the meta things, like we have to demo the product, right? And so that probably is why it's a good lead magnet for us because people then go, oh, this is what a private podcast is, especially for the folks who've never encountered one. We see a lot more people now who have had a course or have been to an audio summit. And so they know now what it is. But in the very early days, people didn't even really understand what it felt like, what it looked like from the listener perspective. So I think that was all really key in making that a really successful lead magnet. And I think, podcasts, like public podcasts aren't really lead magnets. I think all the stuff we create after it, right? Like you building SEO out and like making it searchable and like, that's all great. But like in a public podcast, you have no idea who's listening. So I can't talk to anybody, about the content unless they reach out. And so that's why like public podcasts are awesome. Take a lot more effort, I think, to like create personally, but it is shareable. So like people are like stumbling upon it. And that's kind of how podcasting works is it's a very like word of mouth type of system. And so because someone can go and look for it, or someone could drop an episode when someone's asking about a private podcast feed, particularly with the whole like lead magnet, someone will be like, I want to make a private podcast that's a lead magnet. And they're like, oh, Hello Audio has this public podcast. Like, here's the episode. That's like way more accessible than like, go to their website, find the lead magnet, listen to all these case studies, that kind of thing. And so we definitely wanted to demo that. Not only that, but we also want to show people that Hello Audio does do public podcasts. And it's definitely not our like bread and butter, but we do that. And so we wanted to demo that. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily better. They're different. And I always am big in the business space to like go with easy first to get it out there, and easy and things that are going to give you the best ROI. And so if you're collecting email addresses, it's easy for you. It's easy for your case study people. I would start with the private version. And then if you see the like value in that, like then, right? We knew though too, like we were going to create a public podcast that probably was going to focus on our customers. Like, so I think the style, like not everyone is going to do like a case study public podcast, but it made sense for us basically.
I love that. And I also like that you drew attention to the fact that your private podcast was a way for people to like touch and feel and see and utilize your product, which is the thing that you're selling. And that's one thing I love to point out with case studies, is especially if it's more of like a service, if it's a massage, if it's copywriting, if it's SEO strategy, if it's, I don't know, something that I don't do, if it's any of those things, then it's easier for someone to talk about working with you and kind of get that try before you buy experience without actually going through and investing the time, money, and, trusting you on a lark and just being like, sure, let's see what happens here. So I love that you were able to showcase your product, get people in, and just get them, like I said, to touch and feel and see and experience it. You already talked about this, but can you go into a little bit more detail about how you repurposed these case studies, especially with, the private podcast one?
Yeah. So the Success Stories podcast, when we saw the success of it, people were saying great things. It's 5 to 10 minutes, depending on what they talked about. We knew that there was content there, right? And so, gosh, we put it lots of different places, like definitely quote cards on our website. If you actually go to helloaudio.fm, we actually build in like our embeddable player as well. And so that's actually kind of cool too. It becomes a live testimony on your website. So a lot of content that we pulled from that Success Stories podcast is something that someone could click on a little play button and hear the voice of the person who's talking about their lead magnet or, their summit. And so I think that immersive kind of bring your sales page or website to life thing was definitely something that we were like, this is really cool, right? We even mix them together. I think there's one part on the website where we stitch together voices of people. I think it was about how easy the product is, because in tech, a lot of people hesitate from signing up because they're just like, well, this could be a huge lift for my team. I don't know what's involved. It sounds cool, but it looks hard. And most tech is, but there's something really special about Hello Audio and how easy it is. We just make the feed for you. And that's part of also just what podcasting is. It's easier in that capacity, right? So, we really wanted to showcase every time someone said it was way easier than I thought it was going to be. So we smashed all of those together, right? Created this audio version of that. So yeah, that's just on the website. And then we took it to a step of starting to write out case studies, reaching back out to those folks, asking if we were representing them well, if anything had changed since we launched that. So we did that. And then, we do a weekly newsletter as a way to connect with our audience. Some users, some people who are just, on our list for different reasons. And just having a little blurb, little case study about how someone uses the product has always been good. And then it directs back to the private podcast, right? So I think those are the two main ways. And with the newsletter, to give you some background about how we do it, is on ClickUp, which is our task management. We actually have a board that's the newsletter with the different things. And we actually cycle through them, right? And so we have a date of when the last time it went live. And so, because there's always new people on our list, there's people that don't open stuff. And so that idea that you can reuse, 45 pieces of content, it's not that we put it in every single week, but a lot of the weeks have a case study just to keep reminding people of different cool ways that you can use it. And then now that we have this public podcast, we just say when we launch a new episode, right? But we're also going to have that added to a bank of just really quick ideas that people can use our product. And I think that's another thing to point out is because our product is something that we can use in business and actually has a lot of use cases, we hear from a lot of people that they're overwhelmed on where to start, or they have so many ideas. And we kind of fuel that with these because people will listen and be like, oh my gosh, now I have to do this idea. Or we interview someone for a very specific use case and then they tell us about this secret thing that we didn't even know they were doing. And we're like, what? That's so cool. So half of our live public podcast is actually coaching from us to the person of yeah, you should totally launch that type of feed and that kind of thing, or them, giving us feedback too. So the repurposing part of it is it creates that energy of ideas and innovation and experiments, which is also one of the core things that our favorite user or our ideal user has is I'm cool to play around in business with marketing. I'm big on relationships. I'm big on getting results for my customers. And so, if Hello Audio lives up to that hype, of course I'm going to try this out. Of course it's a cool thing to do. And so those kind of take risk marketers and innovators and people who are super creative and come up with the most unique ways to use it, those are our ideal users. And so by showcasing them, it gives inspiration to other business owners, which I think is really powerful for sure.
Yeah. And it gives that sense of play. And it also, this again is another beautiful thing about case studies where you're highlighting more of the kind of customers or clients that you want to attract, which is brilliant. So just to give you listening or watching this an idea, I wrote down some of the episodes just for people that I even know. I'm on your email list. And that's how I even discovered this because I don't always open all my emails. I'm a typical email subscriber, but one day I opened it up and I had just been interviewed by Emma Louise Parks for her Ambitious Introvert podcast, which I'll make sure that I link. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. I just saw you in this email. And she's like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about that series and that interview. And then I went and looked, and when you've got Jerisha Hawk, you've got Jordan Gill, Tarzan Kay, Ashley Gartland, Laura Belgray, you've got all of these incredible business owners that many of us are quite familiar with. And so even just seeing those names, I'm sure you've got some people who are like, this is really cool. I want in, like, go ahead and buy and subscribe and like come up with their own private podcast. So it's really, really brilliant. And something I would love to know is like, how often, like, are you seeking out these case studies to feature, or are they falling in your lap? Or like, how often are you maybe like sourcing them or getting requests, or what's that like?
Calling me out, Brittany. No, well, it feels like calling me out because I feel like we left the Success Stories podcast a little dormant for a while. Like it just ran, right? And like, if you look at the dates that they get released, so Hello Audio does like instant feeds, and the release dates will be the same in every episode. And it's like May 2021. So that's like when it first launched, basically. And we've added some since then, but we didn't have like a whole system in place. Okay. I'm not quite the system queen. I need to like take some notes from some of the people who've been on our show. No, not quite the systems queen. So we didn't have any sort of like auto process to collect these stories. It was more like just, I think too, just being a young SaaS company and being really connected to your customers, you hear stuff, right? Like, or they post about it, or you see on Threads. Like I've actually really recently met a lot of folks on Threads talking about private podcasting. It's doing a great job of showing me those people, right? And so I think I've booked like several interviews on our podcast just from that and meeting people over there, which is fabulous. And so, I think in the early days, it was, who does Lindsay know in business? And like they trusted me early on and were early adopters. And so I had those connections for some of that early stuff. But like now, like since now we're, 3.5 years into our company, I'm interviewing more people that I've never met before, right? Because people are sending like, oh, this is a cool, unique way of using it. Or like they're starting to tag our company like on LinkedIn or something like that. And I was just like, oh, shoot. Like, and we'll always have like some big name come through and we're like, oh my God, like, and it's really funny seeing that impact that's bigger than just my current reach. And I don't think I got to experience that as much as like a service provider and a course creator. It was more, a SaaS is like a little bit different how it can operate, right? And so, the case studies, like I wish I built in a big process. Like there was a couple times we put it in the newsletter, like, hey, we're looking for like more success stories. But then once we launched the public podcast, it feels like the focus is kind of going over there and less on the quick, easy, kind of short, bingeable private podcast. And so I'm not sure if we're going to like continue to feed the Success Stories podcast or just use now our public podcast for that. We do want to kind of relook at our funnels and our lead magnets and stuff like that. But even now, we do some outreach, emailing past guests and being like, because we'll still have people like, oh my gosh, you should, my client is using it in this crazy way. Like, here's a connection, like, here's an email, like that kind of thing. And so I think a lot of private podcasters, people who've gone deep in it, are starting to see it other places and they want to tell us like, oh my gosh, there's this unique way of using it. So it's definitely not systematic, but we have enough users, I think, and we have enough like innovative people that we're able to kind of showcase. Now, of course, we're going to have several people who've had a course feed, but I think case studies, to me, also highlight the uniqueness of the business owner and like how they think about why they implemented it. And so having a bunch of people on about how they've made their course a podcast probably isn't going to be like the most unique thing. But when I think about who's that business owner behind that course and the course that they sell and why they chose. So someone might have they might be a graphic designer. And like my audience is like, well, a graphic designer could never use private podcasting. That is so visual. But like if I had a graphic designer come on and say, this is how we did it. Do you see where I'm going? So like, it's like, of course there's, only so many use cases. But when we think about sourcing those people, it's like, who's the person behind it too? Like, what's their unique perspective on audio or on customers and intimacy and connection, which are all things that are really important to us with our company. And so that's also what we look for as well. And so at some point, it's not like we're going to be like every episode is like this totally unique way of using it, but thinking about what type of person could come on and pique interest for our listeners and think about it in a way that maybe they haven't thought about it before.
What if you had an easy way to bust objections you commonly hear? Well, case studies can be that thing for you. Recently, my case study client, Brenna, shared she had her biggest launch ever, and she largely credits case studies for that launch success. Each time she heard an objection from a potential student, she was able to simply point them to the case study. She let her students do the talking and the objection busting. I mean, what could be easier than that? Maybe hiring me for a done-for-you case study is an option that's just not on the table right now. Cool. You might be interested in my case study training program. It's specifically designed for solopreneurs, service providers who are wearing all the hats and just need to know what to do and exactly how to do it, so they have a case study on their site they can be proud of and point people to, just like Brenna did. Doors open April 22nd, and we officially kick things off on April 29th. All the info is below. Yeah, and it's not a bad thing that you've launched that podcast 3 years ago now? I can't even do math. 3 years ago. The 2020s just don't like math anymore. But we did them a while ago. You've had this longevity and you're still able to use it and you're still able to repurpose it. And this is something that I try to drive home to my clients and to just anyone who will listen to me, honestly, that they do have a long lifespan, especially if you're continuing to tell people about it, you're continuing to drive people to it. If you incorporate SEO, that's another thing that's a win that will keep driving people for you. But I mean, it's not a bad thing to release something and 3 years later to still be having some wins there. You also touched on something else that's really smart, which is, yeah, sure, we maybe don't want to have oh, here are all these crazy cool ways to incorporate it with your course. Maybe you feel like that's played out or touched on enough. But then you mentioned your values. You mentioned the types of buyers that you want to have. But you mentioned that. So those are other markers that you can use to identify other potential case study features to bring on the public podcast. So with the public podcast, you mentioned how you did this for the private one, but for the public podcast, is there any kind of structure to the interviews or what you ask or the conversations that you have on there?
Yeah, the structure we go off of is a typical kind of case study, what were you thinking before? And so, yeah, we have a model that we follow, but we also are open to it going other places, depending on, how the conversation's going. And so we call them case study episodes. Also, just in case we want to launch solo episodes, we're actually talking about other ways too. So I think this is important from a case study perspective. If you do feel oh, I'm releasing the same thing over and over again, or I kind of want to refresh in something, we're looking at doing some roundtable episodes where we actually say, okay, cool. We've had a bunch of lead magnet people on, let's get them to talk really quickly. And this one we will do async, so that we haven't done it yet, but we just actually talked about doing it before I go on mat leave as well to get some more content before I head out. And so we're going to host it over Voxer. We're going to look back at all the case studies and say okay, which person is using this as a lead magnet? Let's reach out and let's make a roundtable session. And what's cool is it's going to be almost like a roundup episode, but it's also we're probably going to put that in its own private podcast feed or its own playlist, because you're actually getting the core stuff that happens in each episode, which is oh, a lead magnet could be a repurpose workshop. Oh, a lead magnet could be case studies. Oh, a lead magnet could be a storytelling series that has them book a call. Oh, right. And so we had all these people come up with different lead magnets. Someone could binge it instead of having to listen to 30, 40-minute episodes, the whole gamut, right? They get the meat of, that's what I wanted to know. How are people using lead magnets? So this was an idea that we recently had. And I think thinking about it from that perspective, it allows us to, again, more repurposing. I guess that was actually going back to the other question. We now have all this content and all these case studies. How do we this is how coaches are using it. This is how service providers. We've had a string of people talk about how they're using it in their discovery call client system. And it's a little more unique than I thought it was, right? It's not just client calls. They're using it throughout their process, right? And so, yeah, just highlighting them in that capacity, I think has really breathed life back into even just thinking about it, and just making it easier for our person, right? To sure, there's 30 episodes that are, 30 minutes. That's a lot of time. And as an audio person, I know that time is possible to literally binge all of them. That's what the power of audio is. But cool in a we could probably create a lead magnet from our public podcast content. What? Mind blowing, right?
Yeah, totally. I love that so much. And it's actually tying into the idea that I have for the next private podcast that I want to do, is actually taking a lot of these case study episodes for the public podcast and using that, shockingly, as a lead magnet, because that can definitely be a next step for someone who's interested in case studies, or it could be a first step for someone who's interested in case studies. And it's oh yeah, that sounds cool, but what does that look like? How do I do that? which brings me to one of the questions that I get asked a lot, which is, how do you know what questions to ask on these interviews?
Yeah, I think for us, we know our ideal user really well, right? And so when we think about like one of the starting questions we have is like, when did you first hear about private podcasting? Because it was kind of new. And so what we're trying to highlight there is like, it is still new. Like it is still like unique in the marketing world. There's still a lot of unique ways to use it, but that also brings value for your customers and, you know, your clients. And so we like to show that, right? We like to show like, hey, it hasn't been around that long time, because it kind of attracts those early adopters like, oh, cool. You know, I think in the marketing space, like there's so many things that are like trendy and all this stuff. And so we want to show people we are making it what it needs to, like what private podcasting is, like our audience, you know, like our users. And so I think that unique initial question is less like, from a typical case study perspective, like what pain were you in? Like we don't position it like that. It's like how horrible was your life before you found private podcasting? Like, I don't think that that's like what our product does to people. And so ours is more like, what's like the unique way that made you go like, this will work for me? Because you took a chance on something in business that like, you're just like, oh, this is unique and different. Like we just interviewed somebody, she had a subscription box, so very physical product, right? And she just was like, oh, I could use it in this way. And it's like, see, like those first people that like no one would ever think a private podcast would work for them, like took a chance. And so we like to hear like, what was it that made you say, yeah, I'm going to add this to my business. Like I'm going to drop things and make this, right? And so I think unique to us as your folks that are listening, like just thinking about your business and your customers and your ideal folks, like what do they need to know before they sign up for whatever you do, right? And it's like, what do they need to believe about themselves? What do they need to believe about you? And so for us, it's like not like private podcasting is going to solve all your problems in business, or like, oh, you're in so much pain because people don't listen to your courses. I mean, maybe there's that. Like we do talk about that a lot. Like it's really great when people actually like finish your content, but we don't like start like that. You know what I mean? So when I think about the types of questions we ask, it's really about highlighting our values, but also like highlighting our ideal client, our ideal users' values as well. So then when someone's listening is like, oh yeah, that's how I think marketing should be, or like, that's how I want to feel, right? When I release something, or when someone reaches out about how they love my product, like that's how I want to feel. And so I think that's like where we started when we thought about the questions.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And I love also hearing that it sounds like you do like the before and then what was the experience like, and then the after, like where are you now that you've used the product. But you also bring up another good point, which is that not everything is necessarily solving a problem or something that we would think of as solving a problem. So there, in case study creation, I like to point out, well, with keyword research and with case study creation, there's two ways that you can think of it. You can think of it as I'm solving a problem. So then asking people like, what is this problem that I helped you solve? And there's this other option that you have, like, what was the desire that you had, which is what you were hinting at with those questions that you're asking, which is like, why was this so intriguing to you? What did you want to do? So if you're listening, don't feel like you have to be solving all of the world's problems with your service or your offer or whatever that is. It could be just this, like, people have a thing that they want and you're helping them like get closer to that desire instead of solving a pain. And I keep doing this like in front of me, behind me thing, because I feel like behind me is almost this like, what's the pain that I want to get rid of? And then in front of me is like, what's this thing that I want to go to? You have given so much helpful stuff in this conversation. I feel like we could probably talk for like the next 3 weeks, but instead of doing that, let's tell people where they can go to connect with you and find all the things. And of course, I'll make sure everything is linked below.
Yeah, I think the best place to connect right now is either on Instagram, which is just Hello Audio FM is the handle there. But like more community type stuff is definitely our Facebook group. So we have a Facebook community that is helloaudio.community as the URL, or you could just go into Facebook and search Hello Audio Community. And that's a great place where you can see other business owners ask questions about how like, hey, is this lead magnet title make sense? Or like, are you calling it a private podcast for your clients? Like that kind of thing. So that's a cool place also to connect and, you know, be able to ask questions and stuff like that as well.
I love this. I love it so much. Thank you so much for coming on and just like being super transparent with everything that went into all of your podcasts. We will catch you next time. That was really something, wasn't it? Let that really sink in and guide you toward being the answer to even more Googled questions. Thanks so much for joining me this episode. You are the reason this show exists and that it keeps growing. You know, thanks to all those follows and reviews. If you know someone who could benefit from what was shared, send it to them. We don't do shy around here. If you thought of clarifying or follow-up questions while listening, you know what to do. Say hi on Instagram. Check the show notes for all the things that were mentioned, and I'll talk to you soon, friend. Looking for an introvert-friendly way to sell, or even just want to stop feeling so salesy? I've got just the thing for you. Case studies. Yeah, I know. I talk about them all the time, but there's a good reason for it. Case studies are the ultimate marketing resource for introverts and service providers. There's no better way to show someone the exact experience they could have working with you. They get to see themselves reflected in the story they're reading. They start to feel more connected to you and your approach, and they see the results that are possible for them too. There's absolutely no salesy feelings anywhere near case studies. You can get my exact step-by-step process, all sorts of resources, checklists, templates, video trainings, live calls with me, and so much more inside my case study training program for solopreneurs. Doors open April 22nd, and we officially kick things off on April 29th. Click the link below for all the details.